Brian Klimowski has served as the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service Forecasts Office in Flagstaff since 2003, supervising 20 employees and managing operations in the Flagstaff office. His graduate school research had him flying around within instrumented aircraft through severe weather storms on the high plains, investigating the origins of large hail and severe winds. So I don't know if you logged on early. We were talking about some large hail events here. Brian currently serves on the board of Flagstaff Festival of Science, as do I. And he's a weather nerd, outdoor enthusiast, and photographer wannabe when otherwise not being distracted by clouds. Thank you very much for being with us, Brian. And Tom Bean is a freelance nature and travel photographer who's lived in Flagstaff for 40 years. His photos have appeared in a wide range of magazines, books, calendars, and advertisements worldwide. You may have seen his work in Arizona Highways magazine and their books and chapters, or their books and calendars, I should say, in which hundreds of his photos have appeared. And he's long enjoyed watching the sky, especially when it comes to clouds, and in many of his landscapes. In recent years, he's been aiming at the cloudscapes passing overhead. So again, thank you, Tom, for being with us as well. My name's Aaron Weintraub. If you have any questions for the speakers throughout the duration of this talk, you can go ahead and post in the Q&A, and we'll get to them towards the end of this session. And once again, thank you very much for tuning in to this portion of the Flagstaff Festival of Science. All right, Brian.
All right. I'll go ahead and kick it off and get started. Let me share my screen here. And if I could just get some verification from somebody that indeed you can see my screen. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Brian Klimowski. It's a pleasure to be here today. I tell you, I get really excited about clouds and art and photography and science because there's such a great connection between the visual aspects of clouds and the science which is behind. I got interested in weather and clouds as a kid when my fourth grade teacher in Lake Tahoe took us outside and kind of pointed out the clouds and explained where they came from. And that just kind of sparked a curiosity that has not stopped to this day. So anyway, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things today. I'm going to kind of kick it off with an introduction of some clouds and how clouds form, and some really cool pictures I've taken over the past couple of years, kind of since we've had our last Cloud Appreciators meeting. Then we're going to roll it over to Tom, who's going to, give some tips and pointers about using cameras for cloud photography, or maybe even your cell phone. And then I'll end it with some photographs from David Blanchard, who unfortunately cannot be here, but he's an exceptional photographer that's been doing a lot of work in lightning photography. We'll be seeing some of that at the end. So regarding some of the things we're going to be talking about, like what is a cloud, is like one of the most fundamental questions that we have. Here we have a picture of a beautiful little tubular cloud over Artisan Raju, which is a mountain. Well, it's a little bit south of here, but a very delicate cloud forming. But a cloud is more than a physical presence to an artist. It might be an element of a composition. It might be, well, a piece of art in itself. But a cloud to me is a process. It's really a thing of beauty to behold. We'll also be chatting a bit about how do clouds form. Sometimes the sky is filled with delicate, lacy clouds, and how do those clouds form differently from, let's say, those heavy, puffy clouds that you see sometimes? This is a great example of some heavy, dark cumulus and nimbostratus that we had on a day that we were up on this long, narrow plateau called the Uncompahgre Plateau in Colorado. It's about 60 to 80 miles long. And these storms were forming right along the ridge of this entire plateau for miles. And you can see in this picture how the incipient younger clouds on the right-hand side are growing deeper and deeper and forming the precipitation later in their life cycle farther to the left side in the photograph. Just an exceptional picture, kind of showing the process that's going on behind the beauty of the clouds. But some clouds are heavy and dark, and some are extremely lacy and delicate, made of ice crystals that themselves are just very beautiful to look at. So clouds are a lot of things, and we see all types of clouds in Arizona, in this area. As a photographer, clouds are an essential part of the landscapes that I shoot. You know, I love those days when the sky is busy of all types of clouds, whether it be low raining clouds or high cirrus, sunrise, sunset, any time of day can be very beautiful when we have these clouds present. What are clouds made of? Well, they're made out of water droplets and or ice crystals. Now, you know, let's kind of put this into context, because a water droplet is very small. Let's say about 1/100th the size of a raindrop. Okay, so they're real small. And most of the puffy clouds we see, and many of the clouds out there in the sky, are made out of just billions and billions of these tiny, tiny water droplets. Some clouds, which are much higher up, kind of those lacy, high, wispy clouds, are made out of ice crystals. These are clouds that are 20, 30, 40,000 feet above the ground, and are made out of ice crystals, which are on the order of about, let's say, 1.5 times bigger than a typical cloud droplet, but they can grow quite a bit bigger. Some clouds get lucky and they actually form precipitation that falls to the ground. This most often happens when you have ice crystals and water droplets mixed in the same cloud. At that point, the precipitation growth mechanisms really get going. Ice crystals grow rapidly, they fall, they melt into raindrops that we often see at the base of our thunderstorms. But a typical Flagstaff landscape during the monsoon might show some water, liquid droplet clouds, standard cumulus clouds, and those high cirrus clouds as well. So we have all processes going on to form the clouds that we see. What's really fun are those large thunderstorms we see in the summertime. This is a great cumulonimbus that was over the Cottonwood area, which has both a base, which is primarily water droplets, and an anvil where the updraft of the storm goes up and then hits the stratosphere, kind of a stable layer, and then spreads out up above to cause those, you know, well-known anvils on top of thunderstorms, which are almost made entirely of ice. And the rain that we see falling down at the bottom of this storm is forming kind of in the middle of the cloud, where those warm water droplets are rushing upwards in the updraft, mixing with ice crystals, growing the ice, which is where much of our rainfall actually starts in the clouds in the summertime. Falls, gets heavier, melts, and then we see it as rain on the surface. When we have high clouds and low clouds and clouds of all types mixing, it really makes for a beautiful landscape. This photo was taken over the Grand Canyon just a couple weeks ago, after some thunderstorms had passed the area. And we see high cirrus in the skies at sunset. We see in the background on the right some cumulus starting to redevelop into storms. We see some mammatus on the horizon near the left center part, and the setting sun just bringing some beautiful color to this landscape. This photograph was actually taken with a cell phone, just a little snappy as I was shooting some time lapses and other photography with my other cameras. But 2 days after that photo, I came back to the Grand Canyon and actually met David Blanchard, the person that did the lightning photography you'll see at the end of the presentation. And we had another gorgeous sunset. We actually almost had a rainbow that went all the way down into the Grand Canyon. We came close, but not quite. But a spectacular sunset. And just looking at a picture like this, to where you see just a cornucopia of cloud types, we also see a lot of different colors. Notice the deep reds in the canyon from a setting sun, but yet the deep blues as well of the sky in the background. And it raises even more questions. Why do we see so many different colors? Great questions. There's so much behind what's going on in a simple picture such as this. Clouds, to me, and like I've already said, are just an intimate part of the landscapes that I have shown. That mountain that was in that photo earlier was kind of a superstar on this day that we were in the area, to where there were beautiful cirrus clouds, these high ice clouds, just dancing across the tops of these high peaks, causing all kinds of patterns, and brought forth just some incredible landscapes to be had. But you know, when you mix clouds and you can make art and you know the science behind, it's just a tremendous amount of fun for me. I'll be honest. I enjoy being out there, and my wife and I, one of our favorite pastimes is just to go out in a beautiful area like here is Sunflower Hill outside of Sunset Crater on a beautiful evening, and just watch the sunset, take beautiful pictures, and I enjoy the great scenery that we have around here. So what's one key process to making clouds? And it's actually pretty simple. And that is, you just need rising motion. Okay, rising motion in the atmosphere is one of the primary forces that promotes condensation, that is the formation of water droplets or ice crystals, when the relative humidity reaches 100%. Basically, rising motion takes a parcel of air, which might be below 100% humidity, and cools it down as it rises higher and higher in the atmosphere. As it cools, the relative humidity goes up, and at some point, it turns into a cloud. And we'll see that in some cases, such as this now, the same mountain you've seen the third time, to where we had light winds coming out of the east and rising up the slopes of the mountain, causing these wispy ice clouds to form up on top. Well, actually, I don't know if they're ice or water vapor, but this is up at about 25,000 feet. So I suspect they actually might be ice clouds or water vapor at this time. I'm not really sure. But some beautiful wispy clouds off the top of this peak. But sometimes we see broad fields of clouds, like this shot over Doney Park at sunrise, where we had a broad field of what we call altocumulus clouds in this case, to where we have a whole large area of the atmosphere. Let's say the size, the size of all of Arizona, which is being elevated very slowly by either an incoming front or the passage of an atmospheric trough. These weather features can actually cause atmospheric lift over hundreds of miles and cause just these beautiful fields of clouds to form. If the atmosphere is a little bit unstable, you'll get a puffy altocumulus like this. If it's more stable, it'll be very flat and smooth, what we call an altostratus. Sometimes the upward motion is actually almost very violent. It can go upwards at many miles per hour, 10, 20, 30, even 50 miles an hour. And in the biggest hailstorms and thunderstorms, sometimes we see upward velocities of almost 120 miles an hour. And I just have a quick little video here showing some time lapses of some storms around the area I've shot recently, just showing these updrafts in the thunderstorms, which are rising very quickly, condensing moisture, billions of water drops, as these parcels are rising and condensing in the atmosphere, causing the rainfall, in this case, some very heavy rainfall over eastern Flagstaff on this day. Just tremendous amounts of precipitation can be formed from these strong updrafts that we see. The precipitation formation process can sometimes be witnessed in the highest clouds that we see. Here's some altocumulus clouds that are upwards of probably about 15,000 feet that we see these little fall streaks falling from. This is ice. Snowflakes are actually forming in these clouds and drifting delicately down below them, causing these beautiful fall streaks. The same thing that we're actually seeing in this photo that was taken just a little bit after that earlier photo. Beautiful features from clouds. Neat to know the science behind it. Actually, what we're seeing is just snowflakes falling and then evaporating before they hit the surface of the ground. Sometimes the precipitation that falls is very violent. Here's a thunderstorm that was near Lee's Ferry that was dropping a tremendous amount of rainfall. I see this and I see the power of nature in action. It both inspires me and it's awesome. It truly is. I have a great amount of respect for thunderstorms after spending my graduate work flying through them up in North Dakota, where we were tossed about in an airplane, just like a paper airplane in a windstorm. Tremendous amount of power in thunderstorms. Lightning is also a common feature of the thunderstorms that we see, and I do enjoy safely taking lightning photographs. This is actually one of my favorite ones for two reasons. Number one, because I actually caught a lightning bolt. I'm not that good at it, so when I catch one, it's kind of cool. But can you see on the left-hand side of that photo, there's a storm chaser there that's pointing to his buddies where they should be aiming their cameras for the lightning, and it's totally opposite to where that lightning bolt is. Well, let me tell you who that storm chaser is. That's actually me. This is almost kind of a self-portrait that was very inadvertent, but I find it very funny that here I am pointing to the left and the lightning just shoots off to the right. What is interesting is right after this bolt, this is a bolt that was a lot closer than any of the others. We all hustled inside, got off the rim to safety until the storm passed. But I was out at the Grand Canyon with David Blanchard, actually, who was shooting some of these same storms, taking pictures of some more distant lightning as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about techniques to take lightning photographs. I did catch, by the way, about 3 weeks ago, a first for me. Again, I don't shoot that many lightning photos, but I was able to catch a rainbow and a lightning bolt at the same time. This was as the sun was setting in the Grand Canyon about 3.5 weeks ago. And there was a very electrical storm while the sun was still shining, and caught a rainbow at the same time. So sometimes you get lucky to be in the right place at the right time. But as if you love shooting storms and if you love landscape photography, having a knowledge of the weather, where the clouds might form, where they're moving, and you have the tools with you, it can be just a very satisfying experience. Thunderstorms also can produce a lot of side effects, one of which can be dust storms, haboobs as they're called. I happened to be last monsoon season, 2021, at the rim of the Grand Canyon when a large dust storm spilled into the Grand Canyon from the east. Just an amazing event. I have a little video time lapse of it here as it moved in from the east, spilled over in the Grand Canyon, and then proceeded to fill the Grand Canyon with dust. It was actually awesome to witness this in real time. This is kind of unedited photos, so you see other photographers on the right-hand side. An interesting side story of this is I actually had two cameras on tripods. The one that I wasn't holding on to for my life actually was sent over the rim of the Grand Canyon down about 30 feet. But I will say that even though the lens was shattered, the camera still works, and I'm still using it today. So moving on, let's see what else I got. When the dust filled the canyon, it does add a lot to atmospherics. What I mean by that is it adds dimension, it adds depth to the photographs. So we had a very beautiful sunset that evening when the Grand Canyon was still full of dust and this mist and precipitation. Just a beautiful landscape full of the clouds that were there at this time. Of course, when you have rain, sometimes you can have rainbows as well. Rainbows, of course, come from raindrops or the liquid drops. If it's ice in the clouds, you might see other things like halos and sundogs. Here's a recent shot from Lake Powell just this spring when we were on the lake and saw a beautiful halo in the cirrus that was up there. And actually, if you recall earlier when I had those that image of the ice crystals, halos like this are caused from those flat plate crystals with 6 sides. And those 6 sides are what help orient the refraction of the light and causes that halo that we see in the sky. We've seen some unusual clouds and some unusual accessories to clouds, as we call them, over the past year or so. One of the things I was curious about this cloud is the hat on top of this rapidly growing cumulus cloud. That's called a pileus cloud, and we see them not frequently here, but several times a year. If you're looking at thunderstorms as they start to grow, you'll see this little cap that the cloud will eventually almost push right through, as the air around the cloud is like forced to rise up, and not only the condensation of the incipient cumulus cloud or the growing cumulus cloud is visible as the cauliflower looking aspect of it, but that cap on top is the air above literally being pushed up to saturation above the cloud. And here's a fun one, and this will be the last one I show before I turn it on over to Tom. This is a feature that I saw a couple years ago, and it's this little horseshoe-shaped feature which is circled on the image here. This is called a horseshoe vortex. And it's there. I've only seen one in my life, but supposedly they're actually pretty common, but they don't last very long at all. They're tiny little vortices that are rotating on like a day like today outside, where you have cumulus clouds growing and dissipating. And sometimes the air just twists a certain way that an area of condensation just gets twists, almost like a sideways tornado, but it's nothing like a tornado. Just a little twist of vorticity that happens to condense into a cloud, and they can be very beautiful to see. Sometimes they can be quite large, but they're very smooth and rope-like, and oftentimes inverted like this, like a mustache in a way. Sometimes they're called mustache clouds. And the last image that I will leave with you today will be this interesting feature that was over Sedona in the spring. We had a large layer of what I'll call altocumulus, these mid-layer clouds that at this point were made out of water droplets. But they were super cooled water droplets. That is, water droplets that hadn't turned into ice crystals yet, but they were ready because they were actually below the freezing point, well below 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And then an airplane flew through these clouds. What happens when an airplane flies through is it locally cools the temperature because the lowering of pressure with the passage of the aircraft. And it turned that cloud into ice. Now, if you know anything about cloud microphysics, you know that ice crystals grow at the expense of water droplets. That is, water droplets dissipate as they give their water vapor to the growing ice crystals. So what we're seeing here is a stream of ice growing and then cannibalizing the water droplets beside it on both sides of this, what's called a fall streak hole, because this ice in the middle will often just fall right out of the cloud, leaving a hole or a vacant area in the altocumulus in this case. So had some fun chatting about some of the clouds I've seen this year and a little bit of the science behind it. Tom, I'm going to pass it on over to you and stop sharing my screen.
Before we go ahead and start with Tom, awesome, Brian, thanks. I just wanted to get to the two questions that we had for Brian with that section. And that first one from David Schaefer is at the top of some forest fire smoke plumes, we see clouds. Yeah. And David's wondering if that would be water or ice.
Oh, excellent question. Those are called pyrocumulus, okay, to where the fire is the source of the updrafts, which are then causing a cloud, which is made out of liquid water droplets on top of that fire plume, for instance. But yes, oftentimes they are, they are water clouds formed on top of the updrafts from the fire. Great question. Thank you.
Very, very cool. Yeah, and then another question was wondering if you could spell Peleus and maybe just put it in the chat.
Oh yeah, will do. And I'll even send you a nice link to where you can look up the origin of those clouds. Let me get that for you.
And then with one more question just put in
Mhm.
that we could try to get to now, and then we'll have listen from Tom. Jim Torsons asks whether weather notices often reference mile markers on the roads,
Oh, yeah.
and where can we find maps that show these mile markers on the roads? If you know where that might be found, we'll be able to post this on your weather website or even in the chat.
You know, I'll look that up and post it in the chat. So I'll do that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Okay, great. Really, really awesome hearing from you, Brian. And Tom, whenever you're ready to take it away.
Okay, I'm just working a little bit here, trying to figure out how to get my program running. Okay, looks like it's here. Okay,
No worries.
here we are.
And we can see that. Perfect.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, let's let me know if the sound is off at all or anything. But yes, well, thanks, Brian. There's a lot of great photos there, and it's always good to learn new things about the clouds that's going by. So I'm a photographer and have long been interested in landscape photos, and I consider cloudscape photos to be kind of a subset of that. So I'm going to talk about that aspect of landscape photography, I guess you'd say. So we do have a little group here in Flagstaff. It's very informal, called the Flagstaff Cloud Appreciators. And we occasionally have meetings, although we had to suspend most of our activities during COVID. But it's really great to have something where we can get back together to show clouds and talk about clouds. Now, the clouds in the sky overhead have been called the most egalitarian of all nature's great displays because they are visible to anyone, anywhere, as long as they can get outside or even look out the window for that matter. And they're also extremely dynamic, as Brian is explaining. A cloud like this over the San Francisco peaks could pop up in an hour, and it's miles taller than the surrounding mountains, and it's a very ephemeral feature. So that makes cloud watching unique. I also think emotionally they can be evocative. Now this is kind of a picture of whimsy, I guess. What I see is a white rabbit looking up at some passing ravens. You may see something different. And there is a time, I guess, when we tend to look at the sky. That's when it's sunset or sunrise, and also when there's stormy skies. So that in combination can be a fabulous time to be out. And maybe there's even a hint of, unease in a storm like this, especially if you are nearby or concerned about flooding. But originally, I think my interest in clouds was as part of a landscape, and they do enliven the sky, certainly. And so including a skyscape as part of a landscape has been kind of my natural tendency to do if they happen to be happening on a given day, but they add a lot. Eventually, over time, I started pointing the camera higher and higher, I think, until there was only a little bit of landscape left and mostly cloudscape. So whenever we're talking about photography, the question I seem to get from people is, well, what's the best camera to use? And so here you can see I've got upper left there. I've got a big camera on a clunky tripod with a lightning trigger to catch lightning strikes and a graduated neutral density filter, etc. All of that is not something you carry around with you every day if you decide to run into a store and go do some shopping. This is kind of specialized stuff for special trips. And oftentimes you don't get that far away from your vehicle and you're trying to use all this stuff. To the right, I've got a telephoto lens on, so I'm zooming in on a distant cloud to get just part of the scene. But I also take a lot of pictures. Here's a friend of mine taking pictures with his mobile phone, smartphone, I guess you call it. And it turns out for a lot of us, that is the most useful camera to have because it's going to be with you. And here's an example, Sam's Club parking lot, and in that vast building where you don't see anything, and then you come outside and, oh my gosh, look at this lenticularis cloud up over Mount Eldon. So having the camera you have with you when you want to record something, whether it's a cloud or anything else, that's the best kind to have. And for many of us, since we carry our phones around most of the time, that's going to be just fine. Here's some pictures I took this year with my cell phone, and they look very, very good, I think. And so you don't need to decide whether to get a new camera or take a big heavy camera with you to get a cloud picture. Just use your phone if that's what you got. That'll be fine. The main decision a photographer makes is you're going to create some rectangular image. So what should be in and what should be out of the picture, and that's going to be what we call composition. And I'm just going to say at this point, what you have to, one thing you have to watch for is watch your corners and your edges of your composition, because things can creep in there. You're focused on the main subject and you're looking at it and you think you got it, but things have crept in maybe. Now in this case, actually I took this picture just to show something in the picture. It's a little exaggerated what could creep in, it's kind of there, but I think you get my point. Stuff gets in your picture that you didn't notice when you took the picture. So paying attention to those kind of details is pretty important. And if it's in the picture, you should try to use it to your advantage, or maybe move your position a little bit and get rid of it. Stepping a few feet to the left here would have got rid of the sign. And I do like having cloudscapes. In this case, I would say the major subject of the picture is the cloud, but it becomes a lot more interesting because of the landscape below it. We have, this is Mormon Lake Basin looking towards Flagstaff and the peaks, which are, I don't know, what, 20 miles away maybe. But with the peaks and the distant peaks particularly, we get a real sense of distance and the size of this layer of stratocumulus clouds, I guess. I'm identifying it correctly. And here's another example of this summer, a cumulonimbus cloud building up over the peaks, and there's sort of an ominous note to this because at the moment it's not raining over the fire scar areas, but you can see it could be headed that direction. And in this photo, just a line of kind of distant ponderosas are something I think add to the picture, because we know where the viewer is. We're down at ground level and we're looking at a cloud that's in the distance. And without that, we're not quite sure what we're, are we looking out of an airplane or what are we doing? So horizons can be very helpful when composing pictures. But you don't need them for every cloud picture, that's for sure. So here we see some wave clouds, some of them with the pileus caps on top of them, as Brian had mentioned. And here's just a collection of pure cloudscapes. There's no elements from the ground or trees or wires or anything. These are just clouds, all clouds. And it depends a lot here on shapes and textures and of course color. One thing I think it's not a good idea to include in most pictures is try to get the sun in the picture. Because you're going out, maybe you want to photograph the sunset, but you don't need the sun in the picture to have the best sunset. In this case, it kind of works because the sun is screened by partially screened by the cloud, enough light getting through to cause a little flare there. But if you're just pointing at the sun, exposure is likely to be wrong, and you could get flares in your lens, and you don't need it. But it's just something to watch out for. Here's a couple of pictures, like the top left. We're looking at the sun, which is about to set, and it's just behind the cloud there. Sun's breaking through, but it's not a continuous beam of light. It's broken up by the cloud shadows, so it's what you call a crepuscular ray. But to the right of that, the upper right, we're not looking at the sun. In fact, we're looking 180 degrees from the sun. And this is anti-crepuscular rays, because the rays have extended all the way from the horizon, 180 degrees away, over my head, and appear to be coming together at the horizon on the other side. Of course, we love to see rainbows, and those are, as probably you've noticed, you don't see those by looking towards the sun. In this case, in any case with a rainbow, you have to have the sun behind you. Occasionally here, we have what we call a cloud bow or fog bow, I guess you could call it. But again, you can tell from my shadow, it's the sun is directly behind you, and the water drops, instead of being big raindrops, are tiny little water droplets, and the resulting reflected light off of the cloud does not produce the vivid colors. You might want to include things besides landscape items of like trees and cliffs. You may want to include buildings in your pictures, or windows, or parts of your car, or whatever. These can be, especially reflective surfaces like glass and the still waters of the lake, can be excellent things to add to your cloud pictures. And roads. Lots of times you don't want the road you park the car along the road to get out and take a picture. But you really don't want it in there. But sometimes it's actually a very good element of design where the road leads your eye into the cloud in the distance. And so when you've got a road in your picture, try to make it part of the overall composition and not something that's just kind of distracting the viewer that wants to focus the attention on the cloud. So I've got just a story to tell here a little bit. So this is a picture I took in January this year when a friend and I went down to Sedona. It was snowing in Flagstaff, drizzling in Sedona, but we decided to go out on the slick rock, and the rain stopped, but it was a very gloomy day with clouds hanging over and floating below the cliffs in the background. This is in the Munns Mountain Wilderness area. But I thought this had a lot of potential. There's, of course, the red rocks, but the puddles of water seemed like they could be a good element if I could get the right light here. So about a month later in February, I was back, but I knew it hadn't rained for a long time, and I knew, well, not going to be any puddles of water, and there weren't even any clouds that day. So this is fine. This is kind of a classic red rock, blue sky thing. But we've all seen a lot of pictures like this. So I came back again in March. This is after I checked the weather and realized the day before it had rained in Sedona quite a bit. But in this situation, there's clouds. The light's very flat still, though. There's no shadow detail, nothing like that. And but I'm facing to the east. So these rock walls are facing west. They would catch the light if the sun were to come out at sunset. There's clouds, so that could be good. But turning around and looking towards where the sun really is, there's too many clouds. In fact, it looks like there's going to be no light at all on the wall. But then you look and it's like right on the very bottom of the lit area there, at the top of the flat mesa, you can see a gap in the clouds, a slight gap. And this is the kind of thing that occasionally will allow for a light to come flooding in. And this is what happened that day. Like a spotlight hitting the red rocks and the reflections in the pond below, little pools. So, there's the old saying about what you need to know about real estate. The three things you need to know are location, location, location. Well, I'd say in the landscape photography, maybe it's location, lighting, and then look. So combination of those can result in some interesting pictures. And just one other story here. This is September a year ago. I'd gotten up early, went out to Marshall Lake, which is a lake south of Flagstaff, not too far. I thought there might be fog that morning based on the forecast. And there was, laying over Marshall Lake. So I thought, okay, there's definitely a photo here. So we don't need the road, we don't need the car in the picture. So I think I got in the back of the pickup, set up the tripod, took a picture that included some foreground, the yellow wildflowers that were now drying out, and the peak rising in the distance, of course. So here you're kind of at ground level. And then cropping it in even closer, it's just fog and the peaks kind of emerging, rising above the fog. And this picture was the one that ended up in Arizona Highways in the July issue. They had an issue about, or they didn't have an issue, they had a story about fog in Arizona with pictures from around the state of fog, which I understand Arizona is the least foggy of the 50 states. So kind of in summary, I'll say, when you go out thinking landscapes, don't forget the clouds are part of the landscape. And maybe while you're enjoying that, you realize, hey, the clouds themselves are the landscape, or the scape the cloudscape that I'm gonna focus on today. And that may be the most exciting, colorful, and dynamic experience of your photo expedition. So keep that in mind and have your phone, your iPhone or whatever with you whenever you're going out, because you never know what you'll encounter. So I'll pass it back to you, Brian. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. Absolutely outstanding pictures.
Brian, I just want to,
I
just
looked at a couple
interject.
of those and
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
I just interject real quick. So thank you, Tom. But before we get on to Brian's next part, I just there was one other question that I wanted to get to. And that was, will we be able to get a copy of this presentation? I'm not seeing all the attachments in the chat as my chat is disabled. And so these are being recorded. and at a point they will be made available to the public. As for the presentations themselves, I think that's more on the presenters.
Yeah, you know, one of the things we can do is, for instance, all of the links and that were in the chat. If the person can't get them, they can just email me, and I'd be more than happy to email them back with those attachments. But you're right, Aaron, that the presentations will be available on the Festival of Science website as well. So
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
all right. And can everybody see the next slide? With David Blanchard's photos from 2022. Okay, I'll assume you can see that, and I'll just go ahead and get started. So David Blanchard used to work for the National Weather Service. He's now retired. Outstanding photographer, David is. And he has a great eye and a great passion for capturing the natural landscapes in the area. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today to share his images, but he said that we could share a couple of them. So we're going to be looking at some of his lightning photography and spending just a minute or two chatting about how to capture lightning if you're out and want to photograph it. But this is also kind of a teaser. And Tom just kind of let me know. The next Flagstaff Cloud Appreciators meeting might have kind of an emphasis on lightning and lightning photography. Is that correct?
That's what we're thinking, yeah.
Okay. All right. And that meeting is in November?
Well, we have the East Side Public Library meeting room reserved for the evening of November 16th, which is a Wednesday. So that's the plan. Yep.
All right. All right.
To be determined exactly what all. We always have multiple presenters at our meetings, so we'll have lightning, and maybe we can get David to come and make the presentation. But we'll have other people talking, showing other things, and talking about other aspects of the weather and clouds.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, David spent a lot of time at the Grand Canyon photographing lightning, and he shared a couple of these images with me. I said, David, I gotta show these at this because they are absolutely outstanding for more than one reason. Like, I look at this photograph, and some of the things Tom was talking about are just so evident here. The composition, you know, that curve on the right with the rainfall and the fog and near the Colorado River or the Grand Canyon, then with the lightning bolt coming down on the right, balanced by the tree on the bottom and some beautiful dark clouds of the thunderstorm above. Just a absolutely fantastic shot that David captured, in this case with a lightning trigger. I know Tom had mentioned the use of a lightning trigger in his, and indeed that's a device. If it's used and set well, it can actually trigger an image from your camera when it senses lightning. But you have to be able to use it very intelligently, and David does that very well. For instance, you'll see that in good daytime lightning photographs, they're underexposed a little bit. So you underexpose the background so that the lightning shows up a little bit better during the daytime. You also try to use longer exposures than you might have for a typical daytime photograph. Instead of like 1/250th or something, or 1/500th of a second, you go for 1/15th. You go for 1/25th of a second, these much longer exposures. But to do that, you need a neutral density filter to block a lot of the light coming. So there's some technical aspects that make it very difficult, and David does it very well. Here's another shot from the Grand Canyon that David took of a bolt which landed dramatically very far down in the Grand Canyon. These shots are not easy to take, and it takes a lot of persistence to be at the canyon time and time again, and then have the storms move just in the right direction. Here was a really challenging shot. I think I was with David on this day, where we're shooting against the sun, or against the light toward the sunset, or near sunset at this time, with the lightning bolt shooting through a gap in the clouds. Very, very pretty. And of course, the magic hour, when you have sunset, you can bring a lot of color into the photographs. It's a very exciting time for lightning photography. Things get a bit easier as the sun sets for lightning photography because you don't necessarily need that lightning trigger and the technology. You can just use longer and longer exposures as the light outside gets darker and darker. It's not uncommon that when you're taking pictures after sunset, this spectacular picture, I mean, this is, I would hang this on my wall today. I've never captured anything like this, but was taken, and it's probably about a 3 to 5 second exposure well after sunset. Where David was just taking image after image after image at like 3 and 5 seconds. And then, knowing where the lightning is, he kind of positioned his camera and then had the photo there. Oftentimes, the best place to take a lightning photograph is like 5 to 10 miles away. You kind of zoom into the area because you're at a safe distance and then watch the magic unfold. I'm just kind of in awe at these photographs. One of my favorites that Dave shared is this one. And trust me, he has many others that we're not showing here that maybe we'll see in November at the live meeting that we're having, is when David was out shooting after dark in the Grand Canyon, but during almost a full moon. So the Grand Canyon was lit up by light, in kind of this spooky way with the lightning flashing in the background down in the canyon. Just some spectacular atmospherics, some spectacular effects, and just a real inspiration to try to get out there and capture some images like this. So that's all I have to share. That's all, that kind of ends the presentation here for the Flagstaff Cloud Appreciators. If you'd like to know more, Tom would like you to email him, tom@tombean.com. He'll answer all your questions about the local Flagstaff Cloud Appreciators Group. Now that COVID is waning, we're hoping to have, at least 1 or 2 meetings every year in person to where we get to share photographs, share our enthusiasm for clouds, and just talk amongst fellow appreciators. So with that, we'll kind of close things down and leave here an image of our Flagstaff Festival signs. And if you'd like to take a survey, please do. We always like to hear back from from those that participate with the Flagstaff Festival of Science.
Thanks, Brian. That was awesome. And thank you, Tom, as well. Really awesome, interesting photos, and it was really great to get some kind of takes on how that we can generate some of those compositions ourselves. Several comments were asking for when are the meetings, when and where and how do you get involved in that, and when will the meeting be in November, and where and when will those be? So if you could speak to that.
Well, they're not regular, let's put it that way. I picked November 16th because it seemed like it was kind of after Thanksgiving, a little before Thanksgiving and the holidays, and it would be our first meeting in-person meeting for 2.5 years, and I just hope that enough people feel comfortable about that to come out in person. But and where it's going to be, the East Side Public Library, and it would start at 6. You might want to get there a little early, and it will last for, well, probably kind of run over an hour, but not too much. And as far as we're such an informal organization, there's no website to refer to. There's not even a Facebook page. There's me and my list of Flagstaff Cloud Appreciators, which is an email list of maybe 70 people. And but if you email me your address, tom@tombean.com, I'll put you on the list, and then you will get the notices I send out to people. But in the meantime, put that in on your calendar. And I usually get a notice in the newspaper too, in the calendar of events. But the easiest thing would be to write down that date now and send me your email, and I will be sure you get it announcements.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. So that answered a couple questions, and some others just said thank you so much for these world-class photos. They make my soul soar, says Annette. And really, I speak for whoever else hasn't said it. That's just really awesome to see that what you can do with a little determination and time to create some of these amazing photos. And then Brian, do you know the scavenger hunt? Someone had scavenger hunt password?
You bet. I just answered it in the Q&A, and I posted it in the chat. It is Masursky, Masursky.
Yes, and we could post the Wikipedia link for that as well, for the who that is in reference to. But Brandon also said great presentations, amazing images. So unless there are any other questions that come in the next moment here, I'll also say thank you both for talking about clouds and how to kind of come in and take these. And yeah, lots of comments coming in now. Can't wait to see you at the East Side Library in November. Fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you. So I'll turn it over to you, Brian, if you had anything else you'd wanted to say.
I just want to thank you. Thank you, Aaron, for hosting. Thanks to the Festival of Science. And Tom, thank you for the Flagstaff Cloud Appreciators. I think it's great to get this group together and have the enthusiasts, have a place to share. It's we live in a beautiful place, and you are one of the best people to show just how we can capture that amazing beauty. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I know.